you've been following me for a while, you know I've been training for a marathon. And I wanted to make this video to talk about my marathon experience, which I completed November 19th in Philly. It was 18 weeks of training, and the build up to the race day was unique and something I definitely want to share about my thoughts, about my training, about my mindset and preparation, and then all the reflection points I had from ultimately completing that race. So I'm first giving some background about who I am as an athlete, as a runner. I was never a runner, or I thought I was never a runner. I always played sports that didn't require long distance running, football, baseball, lacrosse. I didn't start running consistently until during COVID. And then after 2020, I kind of stopped and fully got back into running August of 2022. That's when I'd say I was most consistent. And since then, I've been pretty consistent, but I had to take 2 months off after I completed the 4x4x48, which is 4 miles every 4 hours for 2 days, because I ended up hurting myself. So in that 2-month period, I really kind of reset, which really stunk. But that gave me the perfect springboard and opportunity to ultimately start training for the marathon, which is what I did. And now, in answering the question of why I would jump straight into a marathon as a runner who had never done a half marathon prior to this training block, it's because I ultimately knew that I could do a half marathon. I had just done a 15K, which is a little over 9 miles, and I did it in a time I was proud of, and I thought a half marathon was only roughly 4 miles more than that, and I knew that I could do that goal. So I wanted to really train and try to accomplish something that I wasn't positive I could do. And I wasn't positive I could do the marathon because I have ankle and Achilles issues that stem from an injury I had playing football, where I dislocated my ankle and I had 2 surgeries as a result. And really, running would just hurt. I would run, and depending on how far I ran, the next day or the next couple of hours, it would hurt to walk. And I changed how I run. I used to run on my heels, and now I run on the sole of my feet. And that change alone really helped me mitigate a lot of this pain. But ultimately, I had never run longer than 10 miles. So I didn't know what was possible. I didn't know how my foot and ankle and Achilles were going to feel come mile 19, mile 20, mile 21, and then finishing the race. So ultimately, one of the reasons I was so hesitant for signing up was it was just such an unknown with how my body would react. And then another point of why I wanted to jump into the marathon was the idea of proving myself right. I wanted to prove that I could do it, and there's no better running challenge for a new runner than doing the pinnacle of running, which is those 26.2 miles of the marathon. And I say it's the pinnacle because it's really the longest distance of a race that is truly a race. We've seen people push to break 2 hours in the marathon, and that's just an insane feat in itself. But in speaking of longer distances that are races, I know people race ultra marathons, but they tend to not be truly individual. You tend to have aid stations and a team to support you, and ultimately a lot of people, I think, do ultra marathons just to finish. It's only that top percent that really are racing and really want to win. But with the marathon, you're racing yourself, you're racing people around you, and it's just far enough, but just short enough that it really requires everything. It requires a perfect harmony between mind, body, and your soul. So it's also interesting to me in talking about the marathon and thinking about the marathon because it's an equalizer where it doesn't really matter come race day. It doesn't matter what advantage I have over someone else or what advantage they may have over me. We all have to run the 26.2 miles in order to be called a marathon finisher. So it doesn't matter how I'm feeling, doesn't matter how you're feeling. All that matters is the distance ahead of you. Every step gets you closer until you finally cross the line to finish. So in talking about my stats over my training block, because I've been posting a bunch of YouTube shorts and other videos about my progression. I did an 18-week plan, and This is not an excuse. It's just a black and white reality. I didn't follow the plan as much as I would have liked. I had a lot of missed weekends because of travel, or because I quite frankly didn't put enough importance and emphasis on my long runs. So I ended up running 74 runs from the start of week 1 until race day. Total of 405 miles, which meant my average run was 5.476 miles. But I only did 7 runs 10 miles or longer. I missed my 16 mile, I missed a 14 mile, I missed a 12 mile, and I missed my 20 mile run, which would have been the longest run of my prep. So the longest run I did was only 18 miles, and it killed me. So entering race day, I was very scared because 18 miles is still realistically only part of the race. I still had 8 more miles to go. So any of those miles after 18 was uncharted territory and was really an unknown for me. So I didn't really know what to expect, and I'll talk more about that later. But my average weekly mileage only ended up being 22.5 miles, which if I just divide the 405 by 18, that's how I got that. And I just had a lot of travel. I had a lot of days off that ultimately just helped shaped my opinion and expectations for what I would get out of this marathon. And so total time on my feet running was a little over 52 hours, which kind of, in thinking about it, over 18 weeks, I was only running 52 hours, which is pretty crazy to me. So in leading up to race day, I mentioned before, I definitely was nervous because I hadn't run over 18 miles except one time, and that was just the 18th. But I knew fueling was going to be big, and I knew that I had to stay as fueled as possible, because what I didn't want was to cramp up. I knew that if I could fight forward and stay hydrated, stay fueled, that it would really just be a result of my training that led me not to hit my goal. So in my prep, I woke up early and I got some BPN G1M Sport in me, which is their carb loading powder for endurance events. So I took 2 servings of that and I mixed it with the BPN electrolytes, which these products have been the staple as I've transitioned from just a casual runner to really running more miles daily, weekly. And then I also had the Ashay muscle gel, which it's a CBD gel that I just rubbed on my Achilles, I rubbed on my shins, and I had never done that before a run, but in reflecting, I think it did help as far as just mitigating swelling, mitigating pain. And then during the race, I forced myself to get water, or the little electrolytes they had at every water station. And I didn't walk until one of the last ones, but I felt me forcing myself to get water really helped me stay hydrated, even though I didn't feel like I needed the water. Race day, I did feel really good. But I had 6 BPN Go gels. I did them every 4 miles, maybe every 3.5 miles, depending on how I was feeling. And then in between those periods, I was using the Salt Stick Electrolyte Fast Chews. So just had a couple of those in my mouth in between the times I was having my gels. But loved the Go gels, felt really strong, really good. There was no upset stomach. I just felt good, fueling-wise, pretty much the whole time. So in talking about my race day performance perspective and how I felt overall, like I said before, after 18 miles, I knew was going to be a question mark. And leading into the race, I just hoped that the first half marathon was easy. And after that, that's kind of when my race would start. And honestly, up to mile 18, I felt amazing. I felt way better than I thought I would. My goal was 4 hours flat, so that's a 9-minute mile. And up to that point, up to mile 19, only 1 mile was slower than 9 minutes. So I really felt like I was flying. I had a little bit of cushion. But how the course goes is after mile 16, you come out on a 2-way street where I'm seeing people finish next to me. So they're obviously much faster runners than I was. And I could see all these guys like really struggling, really hurting. And in my own mind, I got cocky. I felt real good. I had a cushion, and I just kept telling myself, oh, you know, you can average slower than a 10-minute mile and still accomplish your goal. Like, you got this, dude. It's just 6 more miles, or it's just 8 more miles. Like, you do that almost every day. Like, that is easy. You can do it. And ultimately, I felt good until mile 23. The last 3 miles were brutal. The lactic acid in my quads just felt like every step I was going to cramp up, and I told myself I was never going to walk unless I cramped up. And I did not end up cramping up, but I gave it everything I had. I couldn't go faster on those last 3 miles. And where I mentioned all my miles up to mile 19 were 9 minutes or slower, it was truly only my last 3 that caused me to miss my goal. So I finished, my official time was 4 hours and 3 minutes and 18 seconds. And the last 3 miles off the top of my head were all slower than 10. And I think the last mile was pretty close to 11-minute pace, which in reflection, I am very happy with my performance. I'm happy with the effort I gave. I couldn't have performed better on race day. I really gave it everything I had, but this is where I go back to my training. My process was flawed. I missed workouts, and again, that's not an excuse, that's just a reality. But in viewing this, how I've talked about failing before, feedback, and what I will learn from this experience, it's what I put in was what I got out. I did not put in enough work to achieve my goal, and I sleep well at night knowing that that's just a reality. But I also sleep well at night because I know that this is the first of many and not the first and only. So some people say they just do 1 marathon and then be done. I definitely don't want that to be me. I ultimately want to keep improving my marathon time and then go into the ultra marathon field and just keep running, just becoming a better runner, keep learning, keep growing as an athlete, as a runner, as a long distance runner, and really just keep pushing to see what is possible for me. So then I didn't talk about shoes. The shoes I wore, I was planning on running in the Nike Alphafly 1s, which I ran my 15K in. They're super responsive. They have the Zoom cushion, they have the Zoom X. Really love them. But I just found after probably about 9 miles, one of my arches would just develop a big blister. So after doing some research, I found that I wasn't the only one who experienced this. That this was apparently an issue with this shoe. And so instead of getting the Alphafly 2, I ended up buying the Nike Vaporfly 3, and I loved them. There was no issues. They were really great for me, and I highly recommend them just as a running shoe in general, but definitely as a race day shoe. So then I do want to talk about more reflection with both how I talk to myself during the race and then thoughts after the race. So the night before I started reading what I talk about when I talk about running, because I felt that this book would help get me in the mindset to run and just overall feel better about running. Just a little trick of the mind. And it has a quote early on in the book that says, "Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional." And when you think about running, the hurt is an unavoidable reality, but whether or not you can stand any more pain is up to the runner himself. So there was just some thoughts I had as I was running, as things started to get hard. And the first thing was obviously this: my suffering was optional. I could have walked at any point. I could have said, okay, it's too hard, I'm gonna walk, and walking will make me feel better. But the opposite side of that is just telling myself, hey, this suffering is optional. It's roughly 4 hours of pain. And honestly, I didn't really feel pain until the last hour. So 60 minutes of pain to try and accomplish a goal that I really wanted to achieve. Having that mindset made it easy for me to continue, just knowing that the pain and suffering I was in was inevitable, but also just not infinite. I knew that once I crossed the line, I'd be in some pain, but I'd feel much better than if I had given in during the race. And the other thing was, it started as a joke when I was out to eat with my dad and family, but I was just saying, man, just some steps I have to go out and run. And funny enough, just I would talk out loud to myself as I'm running, just some steps, just some steps, just some steps. And just having a mindset that, hey, it's just some steps, every step gets you closer, really helped me. And in reflecting more about this, it's the idea that your mindset and how you talk to yourself is so important when you're doing physical things. I truly believe that your mind quits far before your body will. And if I had told myself, hey, this is too hard, this is too hard, this is too hard, my body would then follow and start walking. But instead I was telling myself, hey, you can do this. It's just some steps. It's just some steps, where I then kept going. And that's just a big learning from running. It's a big learning from playing sports. It's the idea that just anything your mind tells you is what your body will do. And then in reflecting more just on the idea of running a marathon and who can run a marathon, I thought it was funny when I would talk to people about running a marathon, a lot of them would congratulate me, but then say, I could never do that. So in their minds and in their words, they're trying to put me on a pedestal, but inherently they're putting themselves down. And that kind of bothered me, because I truly believe anyone can run a marathon. And anyone is a runner if you can put two steps in front of the other. It's just the idea that everyone starts somewhere. And there's a reason marathon training plans are so long, because you don't start out day one with the ability to run a marathon. I'm thinking back, I would stay up at night worrying about a 10-mile run that I had the next day. And in looking at my times, it's so funny to see how much I improved over the 18 weeks as a runner. And to me, that's just, running is a metaphor for life, as is the marathon. And it's the idea that anything worth doing requires time, effort, discipline, and commitment. And that's just like training for the marathon. Like I said, the marathon you don't wake up day one and have the ability to run a marathon, which also inherently means the marathon doesn't start the day of the race. It starts the weeks and months before. It starts when that first workout begins. And so going back to the people that say, oh, I could never run a marathon, that's just a limiting belief. And it's the idea that if they were to sign up for a race and have that motivation of, hey, on X date in the future, I will be towing the line to start, that gives you motivation to then plan backwards and start really planning to have workouts that compound. Because running is just a sport that I've realized, and I'm a pretty new runner. I don't think I'm an expert by any means. I think there's infinite room for me to improve and continue to get better. But one of my favorite things about running is the time you put in really matters with the results you'll show. And it's such a sport that has true linear progression. And I think having something in your life that can give you true linear progression is really important, because it just shows if I run 20 miles this week, or if I just run 20 miles a week leading up to a marathon, I will run a slower marathon than someone who runs 30. And that person who runs 30 will run a slower marathon than that person who runs 40 miles a week. It's so linear that as you compound, you rapidly get better, which I love. And then it's also the idea that running is a sport of patience, where I've talked about it, that day one I couldn't run a marathon. I could hardly run 8 miles. I could hardly run 10 miles, but that was over 18 weeks ago now. And now it's like my average run is between 6 to 8 miles. So it's just the idea that things compound. So in wrapping this up, it's the marathon experience for me was very rewarding, and it was months of effort, months of early mornings, months of hot runs in the afternoon, months of planning backwards, making sure I'm hydrated to go out and attack the morning, ultimately for 4 hours. And I do think that this process has been very rewarding for me, and I'm excited to just see where I keep going as a runner. So yeah, Philly Marathon 2023, Done. Let's go.